Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Delmond. We've been talking in this lecture about planning and the pre-approach. Now we want to discuss the actual approach. The planning and pre-approach happen before you actually enter into a sales interview. The approach is the first thing you do when you arrive on a sales call. This is going to be after you arrive, but before the formal presentation begins. Buyers are going to size you up in the first few minutes. So this is really important. You need to spend a lot of time preparing for this. Even though it seems very informal and unimportant, it's really important to building that first impression. We can break the approach into two parts, the informal approach and the formal approach. The informal approach involves greetings and introductions. Sometimes this is included also in the formal approach, but typically this is very unscripted banter. It's just where you're kind of getting to know each other before you move on into your sales pitch. The formal approach begins right after you do that, when you've decided you're going to move on into selling your product. But it's before you're directly addressing the product you're hoping to sell. It's a little bit of a weird distinction between this and the formal presentation, but the formal approach is where you're trying to get your customer at ease for the sales portion of your visit. Rather than try and explain generally what these are, we'll go through a couple of different approaches and kind of build what they mean from there. There's really four types that we're going to discuss here. There's non-product related approaches, approaches that start to pique your customers' interests. There's customer-directed approaches where you're asking them questions and trying to get their guidance for it, and then there's ones that are related to the product. But in all of these, you're not actually trying to sell the product yet, you're just trying to get your potential buyer comfortable. The first is going to be the self-introduction. That is the most self-explanatory, easiest of the approaches. It's just where you're essentially introducing yourself. Good morning, my name is Dr. Delmond, and I work at this company, and I'm here for our appointment. Pretty standard. You might include this in any approach that you would do, or it could just be something that you pass off as part of the informal stage. The next would be a mutual acquaintance or reference. This is where you're going to mention the fact that you are maybe friends with somebody that they know, or you've gotten a referral from another customer that said they might be interested. So I've spoken with your colleague George, and he's told us that the way that you build your products, you might be interested in buying some of these from us. Again, quick, short, and to the point. Giving someone a gift or a sample to let them either see the product, or a lot of times you'll use this as a non-product related gift. So if you're working for Cargill, maybe you're going to give your prospect a Cargill hat. Can be useful, but you're telling them that you already value them without having to wait for them to make a purchase to get a prize. Sometimes it works. Now, keep in mind, there is a danger of giving a prospect something that they can play with, because if you give them a hat, if you give them especially something they can read, they're going to be inclined to fidget with that or pay attention to that as opposed to paying attention to your sales presentation. You don't want to create a distraction that you'll then have to compete for their attention over. So definitely keep that in mind. The next is a dramatic act or shock. This could be something where you're, I know in previous examples, you could say something like, did you realize that there are 200 deaths every year from snake bites, and snakes hide primarily in your leaves in the fall, and you're trying to sell a product that's going to get rid of leaves in the fall. It's not the best example in the world, but it's something that might shock your customer. I always hear the one about break-ins for alarm companies, but in any event, something that's going to stick in the back of your potential customer's mind. But again, these are risky because a lot of times they feel like you're trying to use fear to motivate them or shock to motivate them to purchase, and they might see that as pushy. So again, kind of be wary, or be aware rather, of that as you go on. These four are non-product related approaches. You're not actually sharing the product yet. You're not talking about the product. You're just trying to get them hooked early on. A couple more to pique the interest of the customer. One would be a customer benefit approach. A customer benefit approach is where you're going to ask the customer right off the bat or about a benefit. So, do you really like to save money? Are you really interested in improving the profitability of your business? And you're going to sell them a product that's going to give them that benefit. So you're laying the groundwork. If they say, no, I'm not interested, that'd be really tough to come back from. But typically people are interested in saving money or improving their processes, being more efficient. Curiosity. This is where you're going to get the prospect thinking. Maybe you're asking a rhetorical question, something that they can't really answer, but it gets their mind clicking and starting to think about how they can solve a problem. And eventually you want to be able to show that your product is going to be the thing that solves that problem. Those two are, again, interest-piquing approaches. There's also consumer-directed approaches. These are going to be ones that are driven primarily by some aspect of the customer, whether it's vanity, need for praise. This is a good one if you go in and you say, well, I've noticed you keep a very clean yard, so you probably know all about mowers. It gives them that instant feeling that you recognize that they care about this product, and it makes them feel like an expert, which usually is a good thing to get the customer feeling good. You could use a survey, maybe asking permission to get information about whether the prospect might need your product. Usually by the stage where you're actually arriving on site, you will have done this before. So a survey is a little bit better early on, and then you can prepare the results as part of your approach. Or you could use a question. This sets up that two-way interaction right off the bat, which is great when you're trying to get feedback from the customer. So again, these three are those customer-driven or customer-directed approaches. And the last two types are product-related or product-driven. One is showing the product to the customer. You're going to give them maybe a model of the product. You can give them some information about it so they can look at it, but you're not really getting into the nitty-gritty of how it's going to solve their problem yet. So you're not really in the stage of your formal presentation. You could also do a product demonstration. This is where you're going to show how the product fixes a problem. I always think about the rainbow vacuum cleaner salesman who comes to the door, puts some dirt on the floor, and sweeps it up before even talking about what the product can do. That would be maybe an example of a dramatic act or a product demonstration. So again, those two are product-related approaches, where you're actually showing the product. Those are the only two where you're demonstrating or showing the product at all. One of the keys is that you're really not talking about the product so much until you move on into the formal presentation, which comes right after this stage. Again, sometimes the definition's not quite as clear where you're moving from the informal approach past the formal approach and then into the formal presentation. Going back, when you greet the prospect before your formal presentation starts, you want to make sure that you're in good humor. You show a good mood. You have a smile. You can train yourself to present as happy even if you're not thrilled. A lot of times you show up and there are things going on in your life and you just aren't in that kind of a mood. You wouldn't normally have a positive body posture and a smile. As a salesperson, you need to present that regardless of your actual feelings. That's not to say you should hide all your emotions, but it is a good idea to come on and start with a positive attitude because that will lead your customer to feel positive. You want to make sure you shake your prospect's hand appropriately. Be aware of any social or cultural norms that might be unique to the situation. If you're selling internationally, there are a lot of cultural norms in the international different countries that are different from here. So you want to make sure that you're aware of all of those when you're selling. Uh, there are some within regions as well, but it's a good idea to know your audience, to know what you should and shouldn't say and do. A friendly greeting and a rehearsed approach are going to get your foot in the door. They're not going to sell the product. You're going to sell the product with your presentation. And that's what we'll move on to in the next lecture. Make sure you have a look at all the keywords and prepare before your exam.